So it seems like in terms of movies coming out in 2020, we're gonna have a bit of a delay, so why not just go back to the last decade, to a more peaceful time, and take a look at some other movies from the last decade. This is actually a series of videos that I wanted to tackle after I did my worst and best of the decade, but I just didn't have the time, and now I have the time, more time than I'd care to have, if that's a thing, so let's just hop into it. I'm gonna be making 3 videos in this series, where I talk about the 10 movies of the last decade that I think are underrated, overrated, and personal guilty pleasures. So it's going to be a 3-part series. I always like getting the most negative aspects out of the way first, so let's just hop into what I think are the top 10 most overrated movies of the last decade. Now, before I actually get into the list, I need to clarify what I mean by overrated. Because the first instinct a lot of people have when they hear the word overrated is, oh, you calling it overrated means you don't like that movie. No, some of these movies on this list I actually legitimately like. It's just, in comparison to the reception that they've gotten throughout the years, I look at it and go, I mean, it's good, but it's not a masterpiece. There are aspects about these movies that I really don't see eye to eye on, and I just can't call them masterpieces because of those aspects. And there are actually a few movies on this list that I either don't like or despise, but most of the movies on this list I actually do like. So let's just get into it right now. This might be very controversial because I know a lot of people love these movies, but again, this is my list. This is my picking. So without further ado, let's just hop into the first movie, which is number 10. La La Land. Out of all the movies on this list, this is actually the one movie that I legitimately think has the potential to be great. I mean, there's so many excellent things about it. The opening song sequence, Another Day of Sun, is just beautifully choreographed. I remember seeing that in the theater for the first time, and as soon as it ended, I wanted to give it a standing ovation because of how amazing it was. A lot of the other songs are great as well. The dance choreography is absolutely astounding. The score is brilliant, it's well directed. Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone both have really great chemistry, and it's a very good movie on the Hollywood life and just those people that want to continue living the dream. So why do I think this movie's a tad overrated? Well, there's a point in the second half of the movie where it does a cliche in romantic comedies that I cannot stand, where the couple will not talk things out, and because of a lack of communication, they split up. It's just a cliche that I absolutely hate. So that's one aspect I don't like about the movie. Another aspect is that I don't think Ryan Gosling is a very good singer. He's not laughably bad like Russell Crowe in Les Miserables or Pierce Brosnan in Mamma Mia, but I just don't think he's a good singer. How City of Stars won the Oscar for Best Original Song over How Far I'll Go from Moana perplexes me to no end. I'll never understand why. And also the ending drags on for way too long. I had the same problem with Whiplash, which is not on this list, so don't worry. And the one thing I'll say about the ending to Whiplash is that it goes on for a long ass time, but at least it has a purpose for going on as long as it does. The ending to La La Land does not, outside of just being a tribute to the old classic musicals of the 50s and 60s, which is another aspect that I don't quite get when this movie came out, is that everyone touted it as being one of the greatest musicals ever made, and I'm just like, West Side Story, Mary Poppins, Sound of Music. So I just don't think it ranks up there with one of the greatest musicals of all time, but still, not a bad movie, just not a masterpiece in my opinion. Number 9. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. A lot of people absolutely love this movie, and there is a lot to love about it as well. It's a very flashy and over-the-top movie that's very suited for Edgar Wright's sensibilities as a director, especially coming off of Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. It's got a great cast ranging from Michael Cera, Anna Kendrick, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Aubrey Plaza, Chris Evans, Brandon Routh, Brie Larson. The comedy works. The thing about it that keeps it from being an absolute masterpiece for me is that it gets a little too zany. I can't really explain it, but every time I watch this movie, I'm really liking it. I'm just not fully in love with it. I guess there's a lot about this movie that's so specific towards a video game and hipster audience that it just doesn't work for me 100%. It's really hard to explain specifically why I don't think this movie is an absolute masterpiece, but that's not to say it's bad at all. I mean, I enjoy watching it every time it's on. And unfortunately, I don't own it yet. Despite me talking about this movie and putting it on this list, I still want to own it. It's just I didn't make it a high priority like I did with Edgar Wright's other movies, Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz. Still very good, just not one of my favorites. And for those of you who are big Edgar Wright fans, just brace yourselves because the next movie on this list is number 8. Baby Driver. I think this movie on a technical aspect and an action aspect is fantastic. The action is very well done, very well choreographed, and I love how the shootouts synchronize so perfectly with the music choices. The soundtrack itself is great, and it's got a great cast ranging from Jamie Foxx, Jon Hamm, Lily James, and even scumbag Kevin Spacey is good in the movie. It's a very original movie as well. The thing that keeps it from being great is that I don't think Baby is that interesting of a character. The character himself is pretty dull, and he's just not interesting when you get right down to it. And even though I think Ansel Elgort does a good job, I think he's the weakest actor of the bunch, and everyone else acts circles around him. And then with the second half of the movie, things just get a little too far-fetched, to the point where I'm just like, okay, come on, guys, like, give me a break here. But with all that being said, it's still not a bad movie. It's still very watchable. Just not one of my favorites, and it's certainly my least favorite Edgar Wright movie. Shaun of the Dead will always be my favorite of his movies, but to say that Baby Driver is the least good of his movies is by no means a criticism, because it's still a good movie regardless of how I feel about it. Number 7. Mad Max Fury Road. I legitimately love this movie in terms of it being an action movie. The action is so well shot, it's well choreographed, it's insane the amount of stunts that went into this. The editing is pure perfection, and it's a beautiful looking movie. It's just so colorful, and it's so... Man, there's just so much about this movie on a technical aspect that I absolutely adore. I just don't think it deserved to be nominated for Best Picture. There's a lot about this movie that I love, but there's also a lot that I just legitimately do not understand in terms of its praise. The biggest problem I have with this movie is the title. Mad Max Fury Road is kind of deceptive because Max himself is a secondary character. Throughout most of this movie, he's actually, as Corey Coleman of Double Toasted puts it, a hood ornament. He is stuck on one of the hoods of the cars throughout most of the movie, and whenever he talks, some of his dialogue is just very unintelligible. The main character of this movie is Charlize Theron as Furiosa, who is awesome in this movie. Furiosa is just a badass character, and I feel like if the movie had just been called Fury Road, then this movie wouldn't have been on my list, because calling it Mad Max, and for this being the first Mad Max movie I ever saw, it bummed me out that I didn't get to know much about Max as a character. And I honestly don't see how this movie is Best Picture material. Sure, in terms of an action spectacle, it is a masterpiece, as I said before, but the story is just a car chase back and forth. I didn't really have any emotion to the characters. I just couldn't attach myself to this movie emotionally, which is the biggest problem I had. It's just watching a car chase back and forth. Honestly, I think in terms of delivering an emotional response, Furious 7 did a much better job, and that movie is just all kinds of cheese when you get right down to it. But honestly, it had a lot more emotion than this movie right here. Force Awakens had more emotion for me than this movie here. But still, where this movie excels is in the action. And I've seen this movie 3 times. I own it on Blu-ray. I love putting it on and just watching it for pure spectacle, but I can't get into it emotionally. Number 6. Fast 5. This is the point in the Fast and the Furious franchise where everything turned around for the best and sometimes for the worst. And I actually didn't see this movie when it came out in theaters. I saw it 4 years later on Blu-ray, and I'd heard how much people loved this movie in terms of it being so much fun and just a great action movie all around, and being the movie that actually launched the Fast and Furious franchise into the juggernaut of a series that it is. And so when I watched it, I was just like, I mean, it's good, but Honestly, I don't think it's any better than Fast and Furious 6 or Furious 7. There's some hokey dialogue here and there. A lot of the actors are just playing themselves. They're not actually characters. And honestly, there's a big part in this movie where it drags like crazy in the middle. And there's a point where I almost start to lose interest. I was actually planning to review this movie this year in preparation for Fast 9, but since the 9th installment got pushed a year thanks to the coronavirus, you're gonna have to wait for that review. But I'll just say right now for Fast 5, I think it's fun. I think it's a lot of fun, and I really admire this movie for turning the series into something more accessible for somebody who is not a gearhead and is not a fan of most of the previous films. And I also give this movie huge props for bringing in Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson to really make this the series that it is. He will be missed in Fast 9, but I'm looking forward to his return. Number 5. Bridesmaids. The very first time I saw this movie in the theaters, I was hyped to see it. I had heard really good things about it. I heard it was legitimately funny. And when I walked out of it, I hated it. I just didn't think it was very funny. I just thought it was a movie filled with a bunch of fart and poop jokes, except it was geared towards women, and I just didn't like it the same way I disliked a lot of the other movies of this type of nature, like The Hangover Part 2. But then I rewatched it a few months ago, and there's actually some subtle bits of comedy that really legitimately made me laugh. And as the movie went on, I just kept asking myself, why did I hate this movie? This is legitimately funny. The cast has really great chemistry with each other. Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Maya Rudolph, Rose Byrne, all fantastic together. And the subtle moments of humor really work. But there are a lot of points that also do not work. And honestly, I don't think it's as funny as a lot of people made it out to be. So if it hadn't been for my most recent rewatch, this movie would have actually been a lot lower because I did not like it at all. But thanks to that recent viewing, I think it's funnier than I gave it credit for, but not one of my favorite comedies out there. Number 4. Split. There's a lot about this movie that I think is very well done. For one, James McAvoy is fantastic in this movie. The way he has to juggle all of these different personalities is so flawless. And there are points in this movie where he is legitimately creepy. I think a lot of the other supporting cast members are great as well, like Anya Taylor-Joy. But there are a couple reasons why this movie falls flat. I just don't see it as brilliant the way a lot of other people see it. It's a fine thriller, it's very well done and competently made, but there's nothing too special about it. And also, I didn't quite understand the ending. The ending was something where it just felt muddled. I don't think what M. Night was trying to convey came across very well. And I'm not talking about the ending where we find out that this is connected to Unbreakable, because that's a mid-credit sequence. I'm talking about how this particular story wraps up. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say about Split. It's very well made, it's just, again, too overrated for my taste. Number 3. Django Unchained. This is really my least favorite Quentin Tarantino movie out there. And ever since Inglourious Basterds, I have just been very mixed on Tarantino's movies. I haven't seen Inglourious Basterds since it came out, and I just remember it being okay. The Hateful Eight is really good in spots, but it drags on for way too long, and I honestly think it would have worked better as a stage play than an actual movie. And then Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is so brilliant for the first hour and a half, and then the last hour just devolves into something that I don't like at all. Django Unchained, on the other hand, is a movie that has snippets of brilliance here. I think Christoph Waltz is really good, and so is Leonardo DiCaprio. How he got snubbed for Best Supporting Actor over Christoph Waltz is beyond me, because I think Leo did a much better job. Jamie Foxx is good as well, but the big problem I have with this movie is just its over-the-top Looney Tunes nature. This is a movie about slavery. Sure, it's set in Tarantino's fictional history, so it's not historically accurate by any stretch of the imagination. But there are a lot of scenes in this movie where they are handling slavery in a very serious manner. There's some horrific, gruesome moments to it. And then you cut to moments where it just feels like a slapstick comedy. And those are two genres that absolutely should not mix by any means necessary. it just really took me out of the movie. And then there's the obvious elephant in the room where the N-word is just dropped way too often. It really came across as cartoonish, and I do not get how Tarantino gets a pass on this word. And yes, I do understand that back then, white people and slavers probably use that word more freely than they do now, which they shouldn't use that word at all. But given Tarantino's history with that word, it just really feels forced. Like, I feel like he made this movie just as an excuse to get away with using that word, because honestly, I just do not understand it. This is an Oscar winner for Best Original Screenplay, and I don't get it. I just do not get it at all. Number 2, The Tree of Life. This is a movie that I legitimately don't understand the praise of it. It's just a lot of nothing happening, and that's one of my biggest problems with a lot of Terrence Malick movies. Some people can make the argument that, oh, well, they're just slice-of-life movies, and I guess, but if you take a look at movies from Richard Linklater, movies like Dazed and Confused, Boyhood, the Before Trilogy, and Everybody Wants Some are slice-of-life movies as well, but they have a story to them. There are actual characters that you can follow. They have a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a lot of personality within those movies as well. Terrence Malick, he just cuts the actors loose and just lets them do whatever they want, and it just really does not come across as convincing. In this movie in particular, you have actors like Brad Pitt, Jessica Chastain, Sean Penn, and Joanna Going. They are all passable for the kind of movie that it is, but in this movie they just walk around doing nothing, and the camera's just on them without any sense of guidance, and again, I just don't get it at all. And the beginning of this movie where it plays out like here's a history lesson about how the universe formed, and here are the dinosaurs, and how life has evolved. It just adds a little bit of pretentiousness to this movie. How it got nominated for Best Picture, how it got so much Oscar recognition when it came out, astounds me, because this is terrible. So now we're at the number 1 spot, and I'm not going to build this up in any way. If you saw the thumbnail for this video, you know there's one movie that I have yet to talk about, and I've talked about this movie a couple of times last year. So, yeah, here we go. Number 1. Joker. Let me first say the good, because there is some good in this movie. I think Joaquin Phoenix is really fantastic as Arthur Fleck. The cinematography is outstanding, and it does a fantastic job of capturing that old late 70s, early 80s look of New York City, even though this is supposed to be Gotham City. And the score is very haunting. All the stuff in this movie that is legitimately great is great, and Joaquin Phoenix and the score for this movie definitely deserve the Oscars that they got. But I hate this movie. I legitimately cannot stand this movie, and it honestly gets worse the more I think about it. But why do I hate this movie? Okay, well, here we go. This is a movie that really has no identity to it. It's Todd Phillips trying to make a Martin Scorsese movie like King of Comedy and Taxi Driver, and he pretty much made this movie to the point where it's a ripoff, and it has no identity. It's not its own thing. Todd Phillips doesn't really put in any of his own aspects. It just seems like he's copy and pasting what Martin Scorsese did. And also, Todd Phillips tried to make this movie with a statement on how society treats the mentally ill or the poor, and that we should just take care of them more. And the Joker is the absolute wrong character to deliver this message, because there is no incarnation of the Joker in the comics, TV shows, cartoons, or movies where he has ever been depicted as the hero. The Joker has always been a villainous character, and the amount of people who watched this movie and felt a level of sympathy for Arthur Fleck astounds me. First of all, if you like this movie, that's totally fine. You are entitled to your own opinion. Nothing I say is actually going to change your mind. And I'm not looking to change your mind. I'm just stating my own feelings towards this movie. And for me, I did feel a bit of sympathy for Arthur Fleck in the beginning. But the second he kills 3 people and takes joy in killing the last guy, I just said, you know what, fuck this guy. Like, the point you murder someone all sympathy goes out the window. Hey guys, I just wanted to insert this brief little audio clip before someone brings it up. Yes, those 3 guys that Arthur Fleck kills early in the movie were scumbags. They might have had it coming since they were harassing that woman on the subway, but Arthur Fleck didn't kill them to protect the woman. He killed them because they were beating him up. Which, sure, the first 2 guys that got killed, Arthur Fleck could claim self-defense, but he goes out of his way to try and kill the 3rd guy. And the second you go out of your way to kill someone, that's the point where it's not self-defense. You are a murderous. But the whole movie goes on to say, oh, look at how unfairly Arthur Fleck has been treated. Look at this late-night talk show host making fun of Arthur Fleck's first attempt at stand-up comedy. How dare he wrong Arthur Fleck? He deserved to get shot. Dude was just doing his job. Murray Franklin was just doing the job of a late-night talk show host. That's the point of comedians. And when you look at the circumstances, Arthur Fleck set himself up to be made fun of. And then when you get to Thomas Wayne, he's just protecting his son. There's a point where Arthur Fleck goes up to Wayne Manor and interacts with young Bruce Wayne. And a lot of people say how much of an asshole Thomas Wayne is for punching out Arthur Fleck. Thomas Wayne had every right to punch him out because you have a mentally unhinged person who earlier in the movie murdered 3 people and then he just interacted with your son and even touched him and then assaulted your butler. You have every right to punch that guy out. And then the message of this movie is just so ass backwards. Like I said before, this movie wants to say something about the mentally ill or the poor and how we should take care of them more. But by having the Joker be the mouthpiece for this kind of movie, it's almost like the movie's message is treat the poor or mentally unstable with a lot of care and treat them in the right ways or else they're gonna start murdering you all. And I'm just like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's a terrible message. And it really doesn't help that Arthur Fleck is considered to be this giant iconic figure for this movement in the riots of Gotham City. And yet, he does get captured, or people can make the argument that because Arthur Fleck is an unreliable narrator, the entire movie was just in his head. Which, first of all, why did you make the goddamn movie if that was the case? It doesn't matter if he was an unreliable narrator or not, because the fact that this character started an uprising in Gotham City and the movie wants you to cheer him on, it just perplexes me. And then there are 2 final aspects about the movie that I just legitimately do not like. I don't like the fact that it's a comic book movie that's ashamed to be a comic book movie. When I heard that this movie got nominated for Best Picture, I didn't get it. Like, I went on a rant on Twitter saying how Endgame deserved the nomination. Endgame is a much better movie than Joker, in my opinion. It should have been a Best Picture nominee in the same way Return of the King was a Best Picture nominee, where it's the big conclusion to an epic story that really influenced movie making as we know it. And then you bring in Joker, which is really nothing special. It's a Martin Scorsese ripoff, and it's almost like The Irishman came out a couple months later to go, alright, here's the real shit right here. And for some reason, the fake Martin Scorsese movie got more Oscar nominations than the real Martin Scorsese movie. Isn't that a damn shame right there? And also the other problem I have with this movie, and also ties into why this movie is ashamed to be a comic book movie, is that it is Joker in name only. If you renamed a lot of the characters in this movie, if you renamed the city that this took place in, removed anything that even resembled the Joker, it would be its own movie. This movie was named Joker for the name only. It's very similar to Roland Emmerich's Godzilla, how that movie literally had nothing to do with the character. They just wanted to use the name for marketability, because if this movie had been named anything else but Joker, it would not have been the billion-dollar movie that it ended up being. You could do whatever you want with a property just as long as you respect the spirit. Like going back to Godzilla, there are a lot of Godzilla movies out there where they change the origins of monsters, or they change stories or characteristics of the monsters, but the spirit is still very much there, like Shin Godzilla. Complete reboot, but still retains the spirit of the original Godzilla. This movie doesn't even capture the spirit of the Joker character, and yeah, that's it. I got nothing else. You ever want to know why I just wasn't a fan of Joker and why it's just gotten worse for me as time goes on? There you go. My pick for the most overrated movie of the last decade. But anyway, that was my list for what I think were the most overrated movies of the last decade. The next video in this series that I'll be making is my list for the 10 movies that are personal guilty pleasures for me. and I can't wait to share these with you. I'm sure some of the picks that I have lined up are going to cause some controversy, but we'll get to that list when we get to it. But for now, I want to know what you guys think about this list. What are your feelings about the movies on this list? And what are your personal picks for the movies that are the most overrated from the last decade? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media. And until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one